Hello, curious minds, and welcome to this intellectual journey. Have you ever wondered why we value freedom so much? Or why, when we discuss what's true, we appeal to experience and evidence? These ideas, which seem like common sense today, weren't always so. They had to be conceived, defended, and sometimes fought for. Today, we're going to talk about the architect of many of these foundational ideas. A man whose work is embedded in the very DNA of modern democracies and at the core of psychological science. We're talking about John Locke, the father of modern empiricism and classical liberalism. His impact is so profound, it's almost invisible, like the air we breathe. The big question we'll explore is, how did one man manage to redefine two fundamental pillars of our civilization? What knowledge is, and what constitutes a just government? Get ready, because understanding Locke isn't just about understanding history, it's about understanding why we think the way we do today. It's a journey to the origin of our own modern mind. Before we dive in, a quick note. To bring this narrative to life, I've used artificial intelligence tools to generate the images you see. Think of them as a canvas, a way to illustrate the ideas and the atmosphere of our story. They won't always be a literal representation, but rather a visual accompaniment to spark your imagination along with me. I truly hope you enjoy it. To understand the philosopher, let's first look at the man. John Locke was born in 1632 in England. This was hardly a time of peace. He was born into a century marked by turbulence, the English Civil War, the execution of a king, and a fierce debate over who should hold power. The king, by divine right, or parliament, representing the people? Locke wasn't just an armchair philosopher. He studied medicine at Oxford, becoming a respected physician. This scientific training was crucial. It honed his ability to observe, to base his conclusions on empirical evidence, not speculation or authority. He would later apply this diagnostic mindset to the problems of the human mind and the body politic. His life changed when he met Lord Ashley, who would become the Earl of Shaftesbury. Locke became his personal physician and, more importantly, his political advisor. Shaftesbury was a liberal politician, a Whig, and through him, Locke dove into the dangerous world of politics, opposing the absolute power of King Charles II and his successor, James II. This political connection was so perilous that Locke had to go into exile in the Netherlands in 1683, fearing for his life, accused of being involved in plots against the king. It was during this exile that he wrote his most influential works. He wasn't an isolated academic. He wrote with an urgent purpose. His ideas were weapons in a very real fight for freedom. He returned to England in 1688 after the Glorious Revolution, an event that changed everything. It was an almost bloodless revolution that established Parliament's supremacy over the monarchy. This revolution needed a philosophical justification. Locke would provide it. His works were published right afterward, giving voice and legitimacy to this new order. So there's Locke, a physician, a political exile, a revolutionary, a man who had witnessed the chaos of absolutism and religious fanaticism. His life's project divided into two big questions, which would give rise to his two magnum opuses. The first question was, how do we know the world? What are the limits of human understanding? The second question was, what is the origin and purpose of government? Why do we obey laws? And when do we have the right not to? These weren't abstract questions. They were literally matters of life and death in 17th century England, and his answers would change the world. Let's tackle the first question, the problem of knowledge. His answer lies in his monumental work, an essay concerning human understanding. Locke confronted a dominant idea in the philosophy of his time, rationalism, especially that of René Descartes. Rationalists like Descartes believed we are born with certain innate ideas like God, perfection, or logical principles. They would be, so to speak, pre-installed in our minds by God. Locke looked at this with his physician's eye and said, I don't see the evidence. Locke's attack on innate ideas is devastating. He argued that if these ideas were universal, everyone would possess them. But he observed neither children, nor people with severe mental disabilities, nor entire cultures who had never heard of the monotheistic God seemed to have them. Therefore, they cannot be innate. If the mind doesn't come with pre-installed ideas, how does it get filled? Here, Locke presents his most famous metaphor. The human mind at birth is a tabula rasa. This is Latin for a blank slate or an empty tablet. It's a blank piece of paper waiting to be written upon. And what writes on that slate? Locke's answer is one word: experience. All our knowledge, every complex idea, every abstract thought ultimately derives from experience. This is the central thesis of empiricism. Knowledge comes from the external world, not from within our own minds. Locke divides this experience into two sources. The first is sensation. Our senses, sight, hearing, touch, smell, and taste, receive information from the external world. They are the windows to the mind. This information creates simple ideas within us, such as yellow, hot, hard, sweet, The second source is reflection. This is internal experience. The mind observes its own operations. It thinks about its own ideas. From this arise other simple ideas such as perka. These simple ideas from both sensation and reflection are the fundamental building blocks of all our knowledge. They are indivisible. The mind, Locke says, is passive in receiving them. You cannot not see the color red if you look at a ripe apple. You cannot not feel pain if you hit yourself. So where do complex thoughts come from, like apple, justice, universe, or God? Locke says that the mind, once it has the building blocks, simple ideas, becomes active. It starts to construct. It combines simple ideas to form complex ideas. For example, the complex idea of an apple is formed by combining the simple ideas of red, round, sweet, and crisp. The idea of justice is even more complex, combining ideas of reflection like equality, right, and recompense. Everything, no matter how abstract, must ultimately be traceable back to sensory experience. This has a radical implication. If an idea cannot be broken down into its original simple experiences, then it's a meaningless idea. It's an empty word. This was a direct attack on much of scholastic metaphysics, which spoke of substances and essences without reference to the real world. Locke was cleaning house philosophically, but Locke was a subtle thinker. He made a crucial distinction. Are objects truly as we perceive them? He distinguished between primary qualities and secondary qualities. Primary qualities exist in the objects themselves, regardless of whether we perceive them or not. These are things like solidity, shape, size, and motion. An ice cube is cubic and solid, whether someone touches it or not. Those are primary qualities. But what about the cold or the white of the ice? Those, Locke says, are secondary qualities. They are not in the object itself. They are the power of the object to produce those sensations in our mind through its primary qualities, the microstructure of its particles. Think of it this way. Color doesn't exist without an eye to see it. Sound doesn't exist without an ear to hear it. What exists is the vibration primary quality. The sound is our subjective experience of that vibration. This separates the objective world of science, what's measurable, from our subjective world of experience, what's lived. However, Locke was not a radical skeptic. He believed an external material world existed. He believed our simple ideas of primary qualities resembled how things truly were. But he also introduced a doubt. What is the underlying substance that holds together all these qualities? Locke honestly admitted, I do not know. For Locke, substance is like the shell of a turtle that holds up the world. And what holds up the turtle? We cannot know. It's a something I know not what. Human knowledge has limits. And those limits are defined by our experience. We cannot know the ultimate essence of things, only their observable properties. In the essay, Locke also tackles a fascinating question. What makes you, you? What is personal identity? Is it your body? No, Locke says, bodies change. Is it your soul? Perhaps, but we can't know for certain. For Locke, personal identity resides in consciousness. You are the same person you were 10 years ago, not because you have the same body, but because you have consciousness of your past actions. It's memory, the ability of consciousness to extend backward in time, that unifies your self. If you were to lose all your memories, you would be, in effect, a different person, even if you were in the same body. The impact of an essay concerning human understanding was immense. It became the foundational text of the British Enlightenment. It inspired later philosophers like Berkeley and David Hume, and it laid the groundwork for modern psychology. The idea that the mind can be studied, that its content comes from experience, and that our environment shapes us. But Locke didn't just redefine our view of the mind. He did the same for our view of society. Let's now turn to his second major work, two treatises of government, specifically the second treatise on civil government. If the essay asked, how do we think? The treatise asked, how should we live together? Let's recall the context. The Glorious Revolution had just deposed a king. Locke needed to justify why this wasn't a crime, but a legitimate act. To do so, he attacked the dominant theory of power, the divine right of kings, the idea that God appoints monarchs and that their authority is absolute, like that of a father over his family. Locke argued that political authority is not like that of a father. We are rational beings, not eternal children. To find the true origin of government, Locke asks us to conduct a thought experiment. Let's imagine humanity in a state of nature. That is a condition where no government, no human laws exist. Here, a comparison with his contemporary Thomas Hobbes is vital. For Hobbes, the state of nature was a hellscape. A war of all against all, where life was solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short. The fear of violent death was the sole motivation. It was absolute chaos. Locke fundamentally disagreed. His state of nature is not a state of war. It's a state of perfect freedom and perfect equality. Humans are not mere beasts. They are endowed with reason. And reason, Locke says, is the law of nature. And what does this law of nature teach? Something simple yet profound. Being all equal and independent, no one ought to harm another in his life, health, liberty, or possessions. Think about it. Because we are all the workmanship of one creator, Locke was a believer, no one has the right to destroy another, just as one painting has no right to destroy another painting by the same artist. In the state of nature, everyone has the right to defend themselves and the right to punish those who violate the law of nature. If someone robs you or tries to kill you, you have the right to stop them and mete out justice. You are your own judge, jury, and executioner. So if the state of nature is so good, why abandon it? Why create a government? Locke, ever practical, points out 3 inconveniences. First, there's a lack of an established law known to all. The law of nature is clear, but people, out of self-interest or ignorance, can misinterpret it. Second, there's a lack of an impartial judge. When you're your own judge in your own cause, it's highly likely you won't be fair. You'll tend to favor yourself and your friends and punish your enemies too harshly. Passion clouds judgment. Third, there's a lack of an executive power to enforce the sentence. You might correctly judge that someone has wronged you, but if the offender is stronger than you can do nothing to recover your property or protect your life. Justice needs force to be effective. To remedy these 3 inconveniences, and only for that purpose, human beings decide to form a pact, a social contract. They freely and voluntarily decide to unite into a political community and create a government. And here's the key point of Locke's liberalism. What do we give up to the government? We don't surrender all our rights, as Hobbes maintained. We don't create an all-powerful Leviathan. We only surrender one right, the right to judge and punish others for violating the law of nature. We cede our individual executive power to the community so that it, through laws and judges, can exercise it on our behalf. And why do we make this exchange? To better protect all our other rights. The rights we already had in the state of nature. These are the inalienable natural rights. Locke defines them as life, liberty, and property. They are inalienable, meaning you cannot give them up, sell them, or hand them over. They belong to you simply by virtue of being human. They precede government, and government doesn't grant them to you. It merely protects them. If you've heard the United States Declaration of Independence, this will sound familiar. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Jefferson simply changed property to pursuit of happiness. He was quoting Locke. This brings us to the purpose of government. For Locke, the purpose is exclusive and limited. The sole, I repeat, the sole legitimate end of government is the preservation of property, where property includes life and liberty. That's it. Government isn't there to save your soul, make you virtuous, or control the economy. It's there to be a guardian of your rights. A government that exceeds this function, that takes away your property without your consent, taxation without representation, or threatens your life or liberty without due legal process, becomes an illegitimate government. The power of government is based at all times on the consent of the governed. To prevent government from becoming tyrannical, Locke proposed an idea revolutionary for his time, the separation of powers. He argued that the power to make laws, legislative, must be separate from the power to execute laws, executive. If the same person or group both makes and enforces the law, there will be no one to hold them in check. The legislative power for Locke was the supreme power. It was to be elected by the people, or at least by property owners. But even this legislative power was not absolute. It could not violate the law of nature. It could not take away a man's property without his consent. The people were always the true sovereign. And this brings us to Locke's most explosive conclusion. What happens if the government breaks the contract? What happens if the legislature tries to enslave the people or the executive ignores the laws? Locke responds bluntly, the government is dissolved. Power reverts to the people. Locke defends the right to rebellion. If the government becomes tyrannical, it has declared war on its own people. At that point, the people have the right and even the duty to resist and form a new government. Rebellion against tyranny is not a crime, it is the defense of the law of nature. This is philosophical dynamite. Locke is providing a theological and rational justification for revolution. He is telling kings, your power comes from the people, and if you abuse it, the people will take it away. It's no wonder Thomas Jefferson and the American revolutionaries loved him. The second treatise is the Instruction Manual for Liberal Revolution. Now, it's important to delve deeper into a key concept, property. For Locke, this right is fundamental. But how does private property arise if originally God gave the earth to all humanity in common? Locke offers an ingenious answer based on labor. Every man, he says, is proprietor of his own person. Therefore, the labor of his body and the work of his hands are properly his. Your body and your effort belong to you. When you take something from the common state, like an apple from a wild tree, and mix your labor with it, the act of picking it, the apple becomes yours. You've added something of yourself to nature, and that excludes it from the common right of other men. Labor creates property, but this right was not unlimited. Locke established two conditions, or provisos. First, you can only appropriate as much as you can use before it spoils. Hoarding apples until they rot is wasteful and an offense against the law of nature. Second, and more famously, you must leave enough and as good for others. You cannot take all the water from the river or all the land if that means others will have nothing. You must respect the right of others to do the same. However, Locke argues that the invention of money, gold and silver, changes the game. Money doesn't spoil. Suddenly, people can accumulate wealth beyond their immediate needs without violating the first proviso. This, for better or worse, justifies the inequality of wealth. Furthermore, he argues that private property incentivizes productivity. An acre of fenced and cultivated land, private property, produces 10 times more than an acre of communal land. By creating property, Locke argues, we actually increase humanity's total wealth, benefiting everyone. This theory of property is fundamental. It's the basis of liberal capitalism, but it has also been the subject of intense criticism. Critics point out that this theory was used to justify the expropriation of land from indigenous peoples in America. Colonists mixed their labor by cultivating, and therefore claimed the land from hunter-gatherers. Locke's ideas didn't stop at knowledge and government. He also wrote a foundational work on religious toleration. In his Letter Concerning Toleration, written in exile, he advocated for a principle that seems obvious to us today, but was radical then. Locke argued that the state and the church must be separate. The civil magistrate, the government, should only concern itself with civil interests, life, liberty, and property. It has no right to intervene in the salvation of souls. Faith, Locke says, is an internal matter of conscience. You cannot force someone to believe. You can torture them, seize their goods, or imprison them, but that will only create hypocrites, not true believers. Coercion has no place in religion. Therefore, government must tolerate all forms of worship as long as they do not violate civil law. If a church wants to sacrifice a calf, it may do so, but if the law prohibits killing calves to save livestock, a civil interest, then the church cannot. This toleration, however, had limits in Locke's view. Famously, he excluded two groups. First, Catholics, not because of their theology, but because Locke believed their ultimate allegiance was to a foreign prince, the Pope, which made them a threat to the security of the state. Second, he excluded atheists. Locke argued that if someone doesn't believe in God, they cannot take oaths or make promises that can be relied upon. Without the fear of divine punishment, atheists could not, in his opinion, be trustworthy members of the social contract. A view that seems antiquated to us today, but which shows the limits of his own time. Finally, Locke was also an influential thinker on education. In some thoughts concerning education, he moved away from rote learning and the brutal discipline of his era. True to his empiricism, he believed that a child's mind is malleable. The goal wasn't to fill the child with facts, but to shape their character. The aim was to create a gentleman. And for that, the order of importance was, first, virtue, second, wisdom, third, good manners, and only in last place, academic knowledge. He advocated for learning through play, curiosity, and practice, rather than Latin and abstract logic. He wanted an education that prepared people for the real world. Again, we see the practical physician, the empiricist, interested in what works in experience. Now let's put all the pieces together. What is John Locke's legacy? It's almost impossible to overstate. He is, without a doubt, the most influential philosopher in the founding of the modern world, especially in the English-speaking world. His empiricism, transmitted through Berkeley and Hume, became the philosophy of science. The idea that hypotheses must be tested against experience is the basis of the scientific method. His theory of the mind as a tabula rasa dominated psychology for centuries. His theory of personal identity based on consciousness remains the starting point for all modern debates about the self, artificial intelligence, and the nature of consciousness. The question of is a conscious robot a person is a fundamentally Lockean question, but his most visible impact is in politics. The second treatise was the Bible of the moderate Enlightenment. Voltaire brought Locke's ideas to France, where they inspired Montesquieu with the separation of powers, and Rousseau, though the latter was far more radical. As we saw, Thomas Jefferson based the United States Declaration of Independence almost word for word on the second treatise, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, the right of the people to alter or abolish a tyrannical government. All of that is pure Locke. The United States Constitution, with its separation of powers, limited government, emphasis on the protection of property, and due process, is the embodiment of Locke's political philosophy. He is the architect of liberal constitutionalism. Of course, Locke is not without his critics, and they are important. His philosophy is that of the rising bourgeoisie. It's a philosophy that prioritizes the property-owning individual. Marxist critics would argue that his social contract is actually a contract among property owners to protect their property from the non-owners. His tabula rasa theory has also been challenged. Modern cognitive science and evolutionary psychology suggest that, in fact, we are born with some pre-installed software. Not complex ideas, but brain structures that predispose us to learn language, to fear snakes, or to form social bonds. The slate isn't quite so blank. And as we mentioned, his theory of property, though elegant, provided a convenient justification for colonialism. By defining indigenous peoples as non-laborers of the land, European colonists were able to claim it as wasteland ready for appropriation. Even his liberalism has tensions. Locke was an investor in the Royal African Company, a slave trading company. How could the philosopher of life, liberty, and property profit from a system that denied those very rights to millions of Africans? It's a profound contradiction that scholars still debate. These criticisms don't erase his legacy, but they complicate it. They show us that Locke was a man of his time, with his own interests and blind spots. But the power of his central ideas, empiricism and liberalism, was such that they transcended his own limitations. In conclusion, John Locke gave us the language of modernity. He taught us to distrust unearned authority, whether in philosophy or politics. He gave us a view of the human mind as a product of experience open to change and education. And most importantly, he gave us a theory of government not based on fear or inheritance, but on reason and consent. A government that is our servant, not our master. A government with a single purpose, to protect the rights of individuals to live their own lives. That is the idea that sparked the Enlightenment and remains, even today, the most revolutionary idea of all. Thank you very much for joining me on this deep dive into John Locke. He is a complex thinker, and we've barely scratched the surface. But I hope this journey has given you a new appreciation for the ideas that underpin our world and the tools to question them. If you enjoy this kind of philosophical deconstruction and want to support this space for critical thinking, please consider subscribing to the channel. It greatly helps us continue making these intellectual journeys. Hit that button. And now it's your turn. What Lockean idea resonates most with you today? The empiricism of tabula rasa or the liberalism of natural rights? Or are his contradictions what you find most fascinating? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Thanks for thinking with me. Until next time.